The wheels are already turning, and the river is on our right, wide, brown, and older than any story anyone has ever told about it. This is St. Paul, Minnesota, the capital city on the Mississippi, and over the next hour we are going to ride its riverfront from end to end. We will pass a founder's whiskey shack and a railroad king's empire, a filled-in island and a lost village, a 9,000-year-old crossroads and a bridge that changed the nation. One ride, one river. Let us go. Here is where we are. North America, the United States, the state of Minnesota, and a gold pin dropped on its capital, St. Paul, sitting on the east bank of the upper Mississippi, just downstream of its twin, Minneapolis. Together they are the twin cities. But do not let the pairing fool you. St. Paul is the older sibling, the river city, the seat of government, and it wears its history closer to the surface than almost anywhere in the American Midwest. Long before there was a St. Paul, there was the Bdote. Just upstream of where we are riding, the Minnesota River joins the Mississippi, and to the Dakota people this confluence is the Bdote, the place where two waters come together. For many, it is a place of Genesis, the center of the world, a site of profound spiritual meaning that predates every wall and street and bridge we will see today. The city that grew here was built on top of a landscape that was already sacred. Look up from the water and you will see them, pale bluffs of soft sandstone rising above the floodplain. The Dakota called this place Imnizaska, the White Cliffs. Those cliffs are not decoration. They are the reason the city has caves, the reason it has brickyards, the reason its riverbank looks the way it does. In 2025, St. Paul restored the name Imnizaska to part of this landscape, a small act of returning a first name to a very old place. The city's first chapter is not heroic. Around 1838, a one-eyed French-Canadian fur trader and bootlegger named Pierre Parent set up a shack near a cave on the riverbank and began selling whiskey. His nickname was Pig's Eye, and for a few years, that is what people called this whole settlement, Pig's Eye. A letter mailed in 1839 even used it as a return address. The capital of Minnesota, in other words, began as a riverside tavern run by a man named after his own bad eye. The name we know arrived with a priest. In 1841, a young Catholic missionary named Father Lucian Galtier built a small log chapel above the landing and dedicated it to St. Paul the Apostle. He wanted the rough little settlement to take the chapel's name instead of Pig's Eye, and remarkably, it did. Within a few years, the whiskey town on the Bluff had become St. Paul, one log church, and a place traded a bootlegger's nickname for a saint's. St. Paul rose fast. In 1849, it became the capital of the new Minnesota Territory, and when Minnesota entered the Union as the 32nd state in 1858, the city held on to the title. It nearly did not. In 1857, a bill to move the capital to St. Peter was all but passed, until a legislator named Joe Rolette grabbed the enrolled bill and vanished, hiding out until the session ran out of time. The capital stayed in St. Paul because one man refused to hand over a piece of paper. Now, why here? Why did a great city grow on this exact bend? The answer is under our wheels. Upstream in Minneapolis, the Mississippi drops over St. Anthony Falls, a wall no steamboat could climb. St. Paul sat just below it at the practical head of navigation, the farthest point upriver that big boats could reliably reach. Everything moving up the Mississippi had to stop here and change from water to land. That made this riverbank the doorway to the entire Northwest. Guarding that doorway on the bluff above the Bdote stood Fort Snelling. The Army began building it in 1819 and completed it in 1825, a stone fortress overlooking the very confluence the Dakota held sacred. The fort brought soldiers, traders, and settlers. It anchored American power at the meeting of the rivers. Its presence is inseparable from Dakota history here, a history that includes deep injustice. But for the growing city downstream, the fort on the bluff was the reason the river landing felt safe enough to build on. And so here we are, rolling along that same riverbank a century and a half later. The steamboats are gone. The whiskey shack is long gone, but the geography has not moved an inch. The river still bends exactly where it bent for Pig's Eye Parent. The bluffs still rise white behind the trees. Everything this city became, it became because of this water. So let us keep riding and meet the man who turned this riverbank into an empire. His name was James J. Hill, and they called him the Empire Builder. From St. Paul, Hill built the Great Northern Railway all the way to the Pacific, the only transcontinental railroad built with private money and no federal land subsidy. He laid steel across the northern plains and the Rockies and stitched a young country together. When he died in 1916, his fortune ran into the tens of millions, and it all began right here, at the meeting of the river and the rails. Hill understood something simple. Goods came up the river by boat and left the city by train, and every time they changed hands, it cost money. So in the 1860s, his firm built a warehouse between the steamboat landing and the tracks to move cargo cheaply from water to rail and back. Around that idea grew Lowertown, St. Paul's district of brick warehouses and wholesale houses, the engine room of the river economy. Those handsome brick blocks downtown are not accidents. They are what a railroad king's logic looks like, built in masonry. And when Hill wanted a home, he built to match his ambition. On Summit Avenue, high above the river, he raised a 36,000 square foot mansion of red sandstone, finished in 1891, the largest and most expensive house in Minnesota at the time. Richardsonian Romanesque, with electric light, central heat, and a pipe organ. It still stands today as a museum. From its windows, you can feel the whole equation of this city: the river below, the rails beside it, and the fortune they built on the hill. Across the water from downtown lies Harriet Island, and its name carries a quieter kind of pioneer. Harriet Bishop came from Vermont in 1847 and opened St. Paul's first school, teaching in a rough log building when the town was barely a town. The island was named in her honor. It is a fitting pairing, a river city named for a saint, and its favorite island named for the teacher who gave its children their first letters. For a time, Harriet Island was St. Paul's playground. Around 1900, it held public baths and a river beach that drew millions of visitors, until flooding and pollution closed the baths in 1919. Its graceful stone pavilion was designed by Clarence Wigington, the first black municipal architect in the United States, a St. Paul talent who shaped much of this city, ice palaces included. The pavilion carries his name today. We ride past it as a festival park now, but its stones remember a city learning to play on its own river. Just offshore sits a smaller island still, Raspberry Island, tucked beneath the Wabasha Street Bridge. It has been a swimming spot, a curling ground, and for 2 decades a naval reserve base, which is why old maps call it Navy Island. Today it is home to the Minnesota Boat Club, one of the oldest rowing clubs in the country, its long shells sliding out onto the Mississippi at dawn, a green sliver of quiet in the middle of a working river. Now we cross. The river that split the city in two also gave it some of its most beautiful bridges, and we are riding onto one of them, the water sliding by below, the skyline swinging across the frame. St. Paul is a city you cannot understand without its crossings. Each one is a decision about how to hold 2 banks together. So let us talk about the spans. The Wabasha Street Bridge carries us toward Harriet Island. In 2002, on the first anniversary of September 11th, it was renamed the Freedom Bridge. Downstream, the Robert Street Bridge throws its great rainbow arch across the navigation channel, a graceful concrete span finished in 1926 and still one of the city's signatures. And high above the gorge, the Smith Avenue High Bridge leaps the valley on slender legs. The version we see opened in 1987, replacing a spidery iron original from 1889. 3 ways to cross one river, 3 different centuries of nerve. The 20th century brought a heavier kind of crossing, the interstate. Through St. Paul, the freeway river crossing is Interstate 35E, and here it is worth being precise, because the two are easily confused. The bridge that collapsed in 2007, killing 13 people, was Interstate 35W in Minneapolis, not here. It is a tragedy that belongs to our twin city, and it reshaped how America inspects its bridges. St. Paul's own crossings carried on, quietly doing the work a river city's bridges have always done. Now we come to a place with a misleading name, Lilydale. People call it Lilydale Island, but it is not an island at all. It is a broad shelf of floodplain and bluff on the far bank, across the river from downtown, wrapped by the Mississippi on one side and a quiet backwater lake on the other. Platted in 1886 and named for the water lilies that once filled its lake, Lilydale is one of the strangest and richest pieces of ground in the whole city, and its story runs from a tropical sea to a lost village. Remember those white cliffs? At Lilydale, the Twin City Brick Company dug straight into them, mining the soft shale of the bluff to bake into brick. For roughly 80 years into the 1970s, kilns burned here and St. Paul was quite literally built out of its own hillside. The warehouses of Lowertown, the houses on the avenues, raised from clay cut out of this bank. Ride the trails today and you still pass the ruins of the kilns, standing in the woods like the bones of an industry. But dig into that same bluff and you fall through time. The shale here is Dakota shale, laid down about 450 million years ago, when this exact spot lay beneath a warm, shallow tropical sea. The rock is packed with fossils, brachiopods, bryozoans, snails, the coiled shells of ancient cephalopods, even trilobites. Lilydale is one of the most famous fossil grounds in the Midwest. Collecting now requires a permit and care. After a tragic landslide here in 2013, access is regulated, but the sea and the stone is very real. For a while, people lived down here on the flat in a little village called Lilydale, cottages and gardens tucked against the bluff. But the river always takes its floodplain back. In 1965, the worst flood ever recorded on the upper Mississippi rolled through and drowned the village. In the years that followed, the homes were bought out and cleared, and the people moved up onto the bluff. What was left behind became parkland. The river won, and in winning, it gave the city a wild green space. At the heart of that space lies Pickerel Lake, the old backwater that gave Lilydale its lilies and its name. It is a Mississippi floodplain lake, fringed with cattails and cottonwoods, loud with herons and turtles and red-winged blackbirds. Ride its edge on a summer evening, and it is hard to believe downtown St. Paul is a mile away across the water. This is what the river valley looked like before the city, and thanks to a flood, what a piece of it looks like again. Lilydale is not alone. Downstream on the other bank spread Crosby Farm and Hidden Falls, together the largest natural area in St. Paul, hundreds of acres of floodplain forest, a spring-fed waterfall and quiet lakes, laid out by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s. All of it belongs to a bigger idea, the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area, a 72-mile national park corridor that Congress created in 1988 to protect the river straight through the heart of the Twin Cities. A national park you can ride a bicycle through. Back across the water, the old city has been reinventing itself. Lowertown's empty warehouses, once nearly torn down, were turned in the 1980s into live-work lofts for artists, and the district came back to life as a place of studios and galleries, and since 2015, a downtown ballpark for the St. Paul Saints. The grand old federal courthouse, saved from the wrecking ball, reopened as the Landmark Center. Union Depot runs trains again. A river city that was built on freight is learning to trade in culture. And above it all rises the hill, the Cathedral of St. Paul, a great domed church that opened in 1915, crowns the bluff over downtown. Behind it runs Summit Avenue, nearly 5 miles of preserved Victorian mansions, said to be the longest such street in America, the Hill House among them. A young writer named F. Scott Fitzgerald grew up on these blocks and finished his first novel here, in a row house at 599 Summit, before Jazz Age New York ever knew his name. There is a wilder St. Paul, too, hidden in those sandstone bluffs. The old mining caves along Wabasha Street became a Prohibition-era nightclub, a speakeasy in the rock where the music played while gangsters drank in the shadows. For a stretch in the 1930s, this was a notorious haven for men on the run. And every winter, the whole city leans into the cold with the St. Paul Winter Carnival, the oldest winter festival in America, born in 1886 out of pure defiance of anyone who called this place unfit for human life. The light is going gold on the water now, and the ride is nearly done. What strikes you, rolling home along this bank, is how much of the city is still a conversation with the river. The Great River Passage, the riverfront trails, the restored parks. St. Paul spent a century turning its back on the Mississippi, and it is spending this one turning around to face it again. We have ridden through 9,000 years in a single evening, and the river carried us the whole way. From the Bdote to the Brickyards, from Pig's Eye to the Empire Builder, from a drowned village to a national park, this was St. Paul from the saddle, the whole riverfront in one ride. If you enjoyed traveling this river with us, subscribe to Fru World Explorer and come along on the next one. There is a whole world out there, best seen slowly at the speed of a bicycle. Thanks for riding. See you down the trail.